Design.
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 Design means to plan.
Human.
Substance.
Technology.
Designing for a better future.
What is design really?
Let's talk about design.
Making an impact in the world.
The power of design to improve life.
Design to survive.
The pursuit of the unknown has always been part of human DNA, a deep urge that has driven our greatest achievements ever since we've gazed up at the stars. There are few greater achievements in our history than stepping onto the moon in 1969. The moment that defined the moonshot, a feat of pure human ingenuity, a test of our limits. Today, however, the reasons to look to the sky are growing in complexity and urgency. As forests burn, waters flood, and species slowly begin to vanish, we're asking ourselves, are our days on this planet numbered? With this looming prospect, we've narrowed our focus on Mars, a harsh and untouched world at least 56 million kilometers away, a place that some believe to be Earth 2.0. Like a long sea voyage to the unknown, will there be valuable minerals to mine, undiscovered species to farm or domesticate, or perhaps even life reflected in our own image? Some pioneers would see civilian ships head to Mars as soon as 2024. Others even envision a new colony by 2050. Whether this prospect reflects utopia or dystopia, exploring other worlds isn't only with the intention to abandon our home and leave the wreckage behind. Like history has demonstrated, groundbreaking innovation is catalyzed by testing our limits in the most extreme circumstances. And perhaps only by looking at the Earth from the outside can we truly understand our problems and find real answers. Perhaps the question shouldn't be, can striving for Mars save humanity? But can striving for Mars save Earth? Welcome to Can Design Save Us, a series exploring design as a pioneering force for good. We dive into the most pressing problems of our time and meet people using design to solve them. We explore the good, bad, complex, and controversial. My name is Lesley Price, host from the Index Project, and my guest today is David Malott, founder and CEO of AI SpaceFactory, the creators of MARSHA, a NASA-recognized home for life on Mars. So thanks for coming today, David. If you could just give us a bit of an introduction, how did MARSHA come about?
So MARSHA was the result of a multi-year international NASA competition. So, NASA's been thinking about this problem of how do you build on another planet. And, on Earth, we sort of take for granted because we have, materials, we have construction equipment. But when you think about the challenges of building in space, to get anything from Earth and launch it into space is extremely expensive. So when you're looking at building something, whether it's on the moon or Mars, and having to import all that material, all that construction equipment, it doesn't make any financial sense, and it's not scalable or sustainable. So the solution was to build with the materials that you find on Mars. So to use the Martian regolith, which is the rock that covers the surface of Mars, as a 3D print material. So rather than shipping all that material, all that equipment on Mars, in high-level concept, you send a few machines which can harvest and process the Martian rock into a 3D print material, and then have an autonomous 3D printing robot, which will then print a habitat.
So, David, you're an architect by trade, and you've designed 3 of the world's 10 tallest towers. Which ones are they?
Yeah, so before we started doing this work with NASA and MARSHA, I was focused on skyscraper architecture. So I was the either senior designer or design principal of 3 of the 10 tallest towers in the world. So the Shanghai World Financial Center, the International Commerce Center in Hong Kong, and the Ping An Finance Center in Shenzhen. The last one was 600 meters tall.
So how did the I read on your bio that you called yourself a space geek ever since you've been a kid. When did sort of this fascination with space start?
It might be one of my first memories. I was a young kid growing up outside of Washington, D.C., and at the time it was a fairly rural suburb I was in, and you could just see lots and lots of stars in the night sky. And my dad pointed out this one formation, and he explained to me what I was looking at was the Milky Way galaxy, and what I was actually looking at was trillions and trillions of stars, and it was just sort of mind-boggling to me at that time. And so from that point, I think this love of astronomy really stayed with me throughout my whole life. I went to MIT actually starting to think I would become an astrophysicist. That was like my first calling. But once I got there, I realized I wasn't as good at math as a lot of the students there. So I sort of looked around, and I actually found I had a kind of knack for architecture. But when I graduated, there was really no such thing as space architecture. It really wasn't a sort of a career opportunity on the horizon. So I, just began to focus on really what I felt was a very technically challenging type of building on this planet, which was the skyscraper design. And so it's very interesting when the NASA competition came along, because a lot of the principles in terms of like how do you design for buildings on another planet, I had a lot of relationship to how we're designing skyscrapers here on Earth, because you really have to think about it from like an engineering perspective, and how do you save materials, how do you shape the building so it's optimized for physics, and structural forces. So the mindset was there. It's obviously a much smaller building, but I would say no less technically challenging than a skyscraper, because it's all new. Everything we have to understand what the specifics and how the physics play out on Mars. So you have to learn the new rules. You have to learn the environment, and then you design very, very specifically for those new circumstances.
So you guys have actually built a sort of sister or a local replica of MARSHA called Terra. Can you describe to me, sort of walking in, describe the environment to me. What's the journey like as you walk through the house?
So for both MARSHA and we designed what we call Terra, which is MARSHA's terrestrial analog, is what Terra stands for. So it's like MARSHA's earthly sister, we call it. They're both vertical habitats. So we found that it was a lot more efficient to build a vertical shell than to build like a dome or something much more horizontal. So it's a multi-level experience, and MARSHA and Terra is about half the size of MARSHA. So when you step in, what was really important is that you never feel this sense of claustrophobia, like when you walk into a small habitat. So opening up the floors, having a spiral stair which actually wraps around the structure and brings light in from the top skylight, getting these sort of line of sight from the lower floor all the way up through the top was really important to really open up the space so that it feels bigger than it is. These habitats, they are this, very, very, there's a technical challenge, but I think the human factor can't be underestimated either.
You wanted to call it a little bubble of Earth, I think you've referred it to.
Yeah, so when you get into when you get to Mars, MARSHA will be the little bubble of Earth, which you call home for. It could be, for like a year to 2 years, and so, not having it underground, not having the experience feel like you're in a bunker, but very resolutely above the ground, using natural sunlight to create a spatial experience, which would just help you psychologically with this sort of the day-to-day of being in a very confined space, where you don't have that opportunity to be able to step out and breathe the outdoors.
Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned, is it 2 years that astronauts would be expected to be living on Mars for?
Yes, it could be as long as 2 years that astronauts would be on Mars. It's about 9 months to get out there, 9 months to get back, and then you have to wait for the launch window, and there's some good planetary alignment so that the trips are shorter. So you're spending 2 years or so, either in a spacecraft or in this habitat, waiting to return home. And if you can just imagine for a moment, like not being able to step out and breathe like fresh air for 2 years, it's got to, really requires a lot of, I think, both physical and psychological strength. So designing MARSHA more like a home away from home was what we felt our part in making the astronauts' journey just that little bit better.
You must have got these critiques or questions pretty much all throughout designing the solution, or at least releasing it out to the public. A lot of people being very critical, sort of questioning, why do we allocate resources to pursuing other planets when we have so many problems here? What is your typical response when someone questions your motives for this?
Yeah, so space exploration, it's frequently criticized as something that's somehow opposed to caring about the Earth, and I think it couldn't be further from the truth. When you're exploring and pushing technology for space, it does a couple things. First is it gives you this perspective of being in space, looking back at Earth. It's called the overview effect. You appreciate how fragile life is on Earth in this big black void of space. So it gives you appreciation for everything we might take for granted on our planet. So the people who love space are also very frequently very passionate about the issues that are challenging us on Earth, like climate change, for example. So it's the awareness. And then the second aspect is that the technologies that you develop for space, because it's such an extreme use case, it sort of forces this quantum leap forward in technology development, which we would never arrive at if we were just designing for Earth. Earth, you get very bogged down into the status quo of construction. Construction hasn't changed that much, in the past 50 years. But when you're designing for the extreme environment of space and the challenges of how do you utilize local materials, use it as a 3D print material, like these technologies will have tremendous positive impact on Earth. Like once we stop using steel, we stop using concrete, we learn to build with renewable resources that will do so much good on this planet, as well as open the doors to living off planet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really liked your point where you said, there will be nothing more sustainable than going out to a piece of land and pretty much just building what you find there. I think that was a really great way to sort of showcase the technology that MARSHA, is the field that it's pioneering in.
Yeah, it's like a very high-tech Stone Age, if you can imagine. Once upon a time, human beings did build with the materials that they found around them. And I'd say so many places on Earth we did that. But once we think about our cities and all the urbanization going on these days, it's all material which is manufactured and mined and transported and shipped all around the world at a very, very high energy footprint. So this is, thinking about a very, very high-tech solution, which in a way goes back to our roots, which is how do we learn to live off of the land. Mm-hmm. So when you go to Mars, it's almost like putting you back in that kind of like very early context like we had on Earth to begin with, which in a way was a much more sustainable way of living the planet. So it's that new context, I think, which really allows us to develop technology, which would then kind of return us to, I think, to a state of greater symbiosis with planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. I think a great comment that I really liked is by one of our Index Award jurors, Arnold Wasserman, and he actually said that MARSHA represents an emerging pathway that could drive radical change for the rest of this century. And then he called it a gravitational pull for ideas. Do you sort of hope this will serve as, great inspiration for other developments, or have you seen any other developments that sort of have come about since MARSHA's been developed?
Yeah, I think so. There was such a warm reception we received for MARSHA. And then when we pursued the Terra project, the amount of interest, and I think a lot of people did see that. They did see that there was this, gravitational pull, this pull of space, which then is driving some change on Earth, and that they really are two sides of the same coin. So by developing the technologies for space, we can improve how we build and live on Earth. And that's a message, I think, which resonated with a lot of people and gave us the encouragement that we need. So MARSHA it's a great concept. But it's just that. It's just a design. To make it real, to build it requires a lot of work, a lot of technology research and development. It's a long path. So MARSHA set the goalpost very far. It's the aspiration that we want to work towards. But we have to start by developing the technology incrementally.
So no one's caught up to you yet then?
I think, I would say maybe someone out there is because, it is a competitive environment.
Mm-hmm.
You do see a lot of people beginning to 3D print. I don't quite see many people taking our similar approach. It's definitely it's going to be filled with its challenges, but I think because the mission is so special, because it is so motivational, the idea about, enabling multiplanetary life, having an impact on this planet, there couldn't be like a more important mission for myself to want to achieve. And so that powers you through the adversity, through the challenges that you face as a young company. I think if there's that, really strong desire to actually, create something that's going to have an impact and improve the way that we live and build, then that gives everything meaning. That gives us the motivation to push forward.
You've talked about people in the space exploration field being some of the most passionate people about sustainability. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, so there's something that they call the overview effect. I think as one of the Apollo astronauts, his quote was, "We went all the way to the moon to discover the Earth." So there's this particular photo that was taken in 1969 of the first time human beings saw the Earth rising above the moon. So it's called the Earthrise. And that photo, maybe more than anything, sort of like really set off this awareness about how special our planet is, how precious that blue ball, in the void of space really is. And then when I was, growing up in, the 80s, and we watched a lot of Carl Sagan in school, Cosmos, and mm-hmm. he was all about that as well. Carl Sagan was one of the most poetic astronomers. So he was first and foremost an astronomer, but he was also a poet. And he really found a wonderful way to capture that, talking about this pale blue dot, which is the Earth seen from like the edge of the solar system. And that all life as we know it, the only life that we know exists on this little blue dot. And that's what makes it so precious. And that's why we have to take care of it. So, so I think Carl Sagan in particular, I think really inspired that in me at a very, very young age. Because like when you do study for space, when you are passionate about the space exploration, it gives you that overview effect, that perspective of looking back at Earth from a distance and really appreciating what it is that we have here on the ground.
Absolutely. You mentioned life on that tiny pale blue dot. If you think we do become an interplanetary species, as you've previously put it, how do you picture life on Mars? Is it something that sort of fulfilled perhaps fantasies you had fueled by pop culture when you were a kid, or has your research sort of burst any exciting bubble that you had in your mind?
Well, I think life on Mars will be challenging. I think, there might be a certain romanticism about seeing the landscape initially, but it's going to be extremely hostile. and I've heard people trying to talk about terraforming Mars, but these are very, very, I would say, far-fetched ideas. I would see Mars as an outpost, but a very, very necessary next step to enable this, much longer trajectory about humanity leaving our solar system and beginning to explore other solar systems. You study astronomy, and you just going off the sheer numbers of the numbers of stars in a galaxy and the number of galaxies in the universe. Like, we know that life has to exist out there. And are we just going to stay here on Earth and never look for it, or are we actually going to try to go out, seek it, seek other life, and be a part of it? And I really feel that it's our trajectory as a species, as humanity, to be able to venture out, from our home planet, and find our place in this vastly larger universe.
You talk about these quantum leaps. Do you think to sort of achieve more of these quantum leaps, of course, a lot of us know that water filtration, robotics, remote diagnostics all have been significantly fast-tracked thanks to space exploration. Do you think we should be directing more sort of resources to these kinds of initiatives?
I think when when public funds or even like just say, the sort of society's resources are applied to space exploration, it should always be have that twofold objective, where that Earth facing technology is developed in parallel with the space mission. There's there's a lot of I've seen a lot of space startups when they're just focused on the space tech, and then they struggle a bit because then they have to find what is that Earth application, that commercialization opportunity. So if we're investing in space, I think to have that coupling with what aspect of that space technology can benefit the Earth, I think is important, both from the sort of bigger picture view of using the sort of funds of the society or directly speaking taxpayer money. It should benefit the way that we're living on this planet. But in doing so, it can also create a sort of more steady stream of revenue to enable the space part to be able to grow. One example is SpaceX and Starlink, if you're familiar with that. And what they did was really brilliant, because they've been developing a lower cost to launch. So now they have the capacity to basically launch thousands of satellites, which will provide global Wi-Fi, almost like a universal utility on this planet. And then that in itself is of great, I think, benefit to society, but then it also gives them that business stream that allows them to keep innovating and pushing forward to go to Mars.
Yeah, I think SpaceX says, is it 2024? They plan to have the first civilian ships heading over. Perhaps that
which would be amazing. Yes. I don't know the ins and outs of where they are in the schedule, but I think that's what they've talked about. Certainly very ambitious. Timelines might get stretched, but yes. I think the remarkable thing about SpaceX is even if the timelines get stretched, they by God, they do what they say that they're going to do. And it's remarkable what they've achieved. So, the timeline might get stretched, but I have no doubt they'll get there. I really have no doubt they'll get there.
When we talk about leaving Earth, do you, I guess even on a bad day, ever consider that we might have to leave Earth behind? Do you even entertain that thought, or not really?
Not really, because I guess I'm just an optimist by nature, but I also think by the time that we develop the technologies to travel to another planet, to build off-world, we will be able to harness those technologies and apply them to shaping a better Earth. I gotta believe that that's the solution.
Yeah, we really hope so too. Hence why, we're massive fans of MARSHA and are really supportive of the mission. Do you think the public is, we have received comments about MARSHA, and I think we've told you that we can receive some controversial comments as well. Do you think sort of public perception has embraced MARSHA generally, or would you still say we've got quite a long way to go?
Well, I think MARSHA by itself, there was a lot of critique, but when you put MARSHA with Terra, or you put the space together with the Earth mission, then I think it makes a lot more sense to a lot more people. So I think that going back to my point about always coupling the space technology with the Earth applications is so key, because ultimately we have like challenges on Earth that we should be investing in. Climate change, homelessness, education, gun control. There's so many challenges on Earth, and so it's not right in a way just to sort of have this escapism and just want to sort of leave it all behind and throw a lot of money into going into space. I think that's not the point at all. But if you do spaces that pull, right? You were describing earlier, it's that gravitational pull up.
Mm-hmm.
It does provide you with that optimism, that thing to look forward to, the thing to aspire towards and drive a technology forward and basically pull an entire generation up with you. If you think about Apollo and what that did in terms of just getting an entire generation of the world excited about science and engineering, and that impact can't be underestimated, and this push we have today, not just SpaceFactory, but SpaceX and NASA, and all these companies looking about how we go to Mars. I hope that that's the Apollo of our lifetimes, and it has that same impact about us inspiring another generation, to study, to be passionate about the sciences and get into technology.
Yeah, I think that visionary appeal has a lot. Yeah, it means a lot to people. It truly is a moonshot, and I think that's what it's so important that we, praise solutions like MARSHA.
So moonshots are important, but equally important is you have to take the steps to get there. Mm-hmm. Which is what made Apollo so great, was that it was mission accomplished, right? So there's the moonshots and the kind of quantum leap of technology, but you begin to break that into little tiny steps, and then just keep solving one challenge at a time until you get there.
So we're hoping for a colony on Mars in 2050. Do you think that's likely, or how do you see the space exploration industry sort of developing in, say, 30 years?
I think we will see something on Mars by 2050. So colony, I suppose, is relative. You have to start thinking about what does that mean in terms of numbers or permanence. I think we will have some form of, at least an outpost or a kind of base camp, some mark of humanity on Mars by 2050, I think certainly sounds plausible. But whether you can do it sustainably and at scale, I think will remain a challenge, not just because of the technology, but the economics of it all. I think, just going to Mars, the feeling is that there's maybe not that much at Mars in and of itself, other than, it doesn't make sense to extract materials and minerals and mine them and create an economy of things that you bring back to Earth. So finding the economic driver that would sort of justify a long-term colony in the way that, on Earth there were economic drivers that led to cities and where they got built and in which cities lasted and got sustained. It's much more complex than I think just the technology of getting there. So it's hard to say.
Still got a long way to go.
Still got a long way to go.
Perfect.
The building is just a part of it. The transportation is just a part of it. So we're hoping that there's lots of inspired and smart people out there who are thinking about all the aspects of all the bits of the equation that are really required if humanity really does set out on this goal of making life multiplanetary.
Definitely. Well, we remain optimistic. Thanks, David. I think, it's been a really interesting talk, and thanks so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much, Lesley. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Can Design Save Us by the Index Project. This episode was produced by Sidsel, Nørgaard, with music by Kristina, Lilleskov. Join us for the next episode where we'll dive into design for civil rights.